The message ended, and nobody moved. I could hear the ice in my mom's glass hitting the side of the cup. Clink, clink. Jake was staring at the table like it had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the room. And my mom had gone completely pale. Which is strange, because that moment, the silence, the recording still glowing on my phone screen, everyone frozen, that wasn't actually where the story started. Not even close. But I guess that's the moment everything finally became impossible to pretend about. I remember something weird from that second though. The corner of my phone screen had this tiny crack in it. Like a spider web in the glass. I kept rubbing my thumb over it while the message played. I don't know why that detail stuck with me. Actually, I do know why. But that part won't make sense until later. Anyway. Hi. I'm Emma. I didn't think I'd ever say this story out loud. Not like this. Mostly because for a long time I wasn't even sure what had really happened. Or if I was just overreacting. That sounds pathetic when I say it now. But when you grow up in a house where conflict gets labeled as drama, you learn to doubt yourself pretty fast. Especially when the person saying it is your mom. Her name's Carol, by the way. And if you met her, you'd probably like her immediately. Most people do. She's the kind of woman who remembers everyone's birthday, bakes things for neighbors, and somehow always knows exactly what to say at the right moment. The kind of person people call gracious. I used to be proud of that. Like it meant something about me too. Because when I was growing up, my role in the family was, I guess the easiest way to say it is I was the calm one. My dad left when I was 10. Nothing dramatic. Just one of those quiet divorces where adults say things like we grew apart and kids pretend they understand. After that it was just me and my mom. And I learned pretty quickly that things stayed peaceful when I didn't push too hard. If something bothered me, I let it go. If she dismissed something I said, I told myself she probably knew better. If she said I was being sensitive, well, I believed her. I think a lot of daughters do that without realizing it. You assume your mom sees things more clearly than you do. That maybe she understands the world better. So when I met Jake 2 years ago, and my mom absolutely loved him, that meant something to me. Jake had this relaxed confidence that made people trust him fast. He worked in marketing, wore those clean white sneakers that somehow never got dirty, and he always made eye contact when people talked. My mom adored that about him. Emma, she said the first time she met him, he's very mature. I remember feeling relieved when she said that. Like I had passed some kind of invisible test. Looking back now, that was probably the first moment I should have paid closer attention. But at the time, everything felt normal. Jake came to family dinners. My mom laughed at his jokes. He helped her carry groceries in from the car like he'd been part of the family forever. And honestly, I felt lucky. Because when the two most important people in your life get along that well, it feels like you've done something right. There was just one small thing. Something I noticed once or twice but brushed off because it seemed so minor. Sometimes Jake and my mom would have these little side conversations. Nothing secretive exactly. Just quiet. Like they were sharing some observation about me that didn't need my input. And every time it happened, my mom would give this tiny smile. The same smile she used when she thought I was being a little ridiculous about something. I didn't think much of it back then. Actually, that's not true. I did notice it. I just decided it didn't matter. Which is kind of the theme of this whole story, if I'm being honest. Ignoring things that felt slightly off. Telling myself I was imagining it. Because admitting something was wrong would have meant, what, exactly? That the two people I trusted most were somehow on the same side of something I didn't understand yet. No. That felt too dramatic. So I let it go. And things stayed calm for a long time after that. Or at least, they looked calm on the surface. The first real crack didn't show up until the night Jake left my apartment. And the strange part is, I almost convinced myself that moment wasn't important either. The night Jake left my apartment wasn't dramatic. That's probably why it took me so long to realize it mattered. No shouting. No doors slamming. Just one sentence that didn't sit right. But before that night makes sense, I should probably explain what our relationship actually looked like. Because if you only saw us from the outside, you'd probably think we were normal. Maybe even stable. Jake and I met at a friend's birthday party 2 years earlier. I remember we spent most of that night talking on the balcony because the apartment was packed and loud. He was easy to talk to. Not intense. Not overly charming. Just steady. And for someone like me, someone who spent a lot of time worrying about whether I was being too much, that steadiness felt safe. Jake didn't seem bothered by emotions. At least, that's what I thought at first. The first few months were good. Really good, actually. We fell into routines quickly. Sunday grocery runs. Movie nights. Random late drives for milkshakes. My mom liked that part. Routine is healthy, she'd say. She started inviting Jake over for dinner once or twice a month. And those dinners always followed the same rhythm. My mom would cook something elaborate she claimed was simple. Jake would compliment it a little too enthusiastically, and I'd sit there feeling oddly proud. Like I had built this little peaceful triangle between the three of us. But something small started happening about 6 months into the relationship. At first, it was just comments. Jake would say things like, "You know, Emma can be a little sensitive sometimes." And my mom would laugh softly. Not cruelly. Just knowingly. Then she'd say something like, "Oh, she's always been that way." The first time it happened I laughed too. Because it sounded harmless. Like they were just observing a personality trait. But those moments started repeating. Small. Casual. Easy to ignore. If I got emotional about something at work, Jake might say, "See what I mean?" And my mom would smile. That same smile. The one that suggested she understood something about me that I didn't. Looking back, I think that's where the dynamic started shifting. Not in some dramatic betrayal. Just in tiny moments where two people quietly agreed about who you were. Without asking you. And the strange thing is, I didn't push back. I adjusted. I started catching myself before reacting to things. Before expressing frustration. Before saying something might have hurt my feelings. Because I didn't want to prove their point. Which is a weird trap when you think about it. Trying not to be too sensitive can slowly make you silent. There's one dinner in particular that keeps coming back to me now. My mom had made this lemon chicken dish she was really proud of. Jake had just finished telling a story about someone at his office who cried during a meeting. And he laughed and said, "Some people just don't handle criticism well." My mom nodded. Then she said something that seemed like a joke at the time. Emma used to cry when her math homework got hard. Everyone laughed. Including me. But I remember feeling my face get warm. Because I hadn't cried about math homework since I was 8. And suddenly I felt like the room had quietly decided something about me that wasn't true anymore. I pushed the feeling away. Because making a moment like that into a thing would have been dramatic. And that's when I had a thought I didn't say out loud. I remember thinking, maybe I really am the sensitive one. I wonder sometimes how many people have had that moment. Where a room full of people agrees on a version of you. And you slowly start believing it too. I wonder if I was the only one who just accepted it for so long. Anyway, things continued like that for a while. Not bad. Just slightly tilted. Until the night Jake came over to my apartment after work. He looked tired. Distracted. We ate takeout on the couch and watched half an episode of something neither of us were really paying attention to. Then out of nowhere he said, "Your mom actually gets you better than you think." I laughed a little. Of course she does. She raised me. But Jake shook his head. And that's when he said the sentence that, at the time, felt like nothing. But later, I realized it was the first real crack. He said, "Yeah, we talk about you sometimes." Then he stood up, grabbed his jacket, and said he had an early meeting the next morning. And I remember sitting there after he left thinking one strange thing. Not jealousy. Not anger. Just confusion. Because I couldn't remember ever seeing Jake and my mom exchange phone numbers. At first, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. People talk. Boyfriends talk to parents sometimes. Right. That's what I kept repeating in my head the night Jake said it. We talk about you sometimes. It sounded normal enough. Still, the way he said it had felt strange. Too casual. Like the information had slipped out before he realized it might sound odd. But the human brain is very good at protecting the version of reality it prefers. So mine immediately went to work. Maybe he meant they talked at dinners. Maybe he asked her advice once or twice. Maybe I was reading into it. By the next morning, I had almost convinced myself the moment didn't matter. That's the weird thing about unease. If nothing confirms it quickly, it starts dissolving. And for a while, nothing did. Jake still texted me good morning. My mom still called on Sundays. Life continued in that comfortable rhythm that makes doubt feel embarrassing. But there was one small change. A tiny shift in my attention. Once the idea existed in my head, I started noticing things I hadn't before. For example, Jake suddenly seemed very familiar with my mom's opinions. One afternoon we were walking through a bookstore and I picked up this bright yellow notebook. I said I might start journaling again. Jake laughed. Carol always said you overthink things when you write stuff down. I froze for a second. Because I hadn't told him that. And my mom definitely hadn't said it in front of him. I remember asking, very lightly, when did you two talk about that? Jake didn't even hesitate. Oh, she mentioned it once. Once. That word sat weirdly in my chest. But again, I let it go. Because questioning it felt like accusing someone of something I couldn't prove. And I hated the idea of being the suspicious girlfriend. So for a while I stayed quiet. And honestly, things actually felt calm again after that. Jake was affectionate. Attentive. He started bringing me coffee before my early classes. We even talked about taking a trip that summer. There's something dangerous about those periods of normalcy. They make you feel silly for ever worrying. Like your brain had created a problem that didn't exist. For about 2 weeks, I believed that. Then one evening I was sitting on Jake's couch while he showered. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. I wasn't trying to snoop. I swear I wasn't. The screen just lit up right in front of me. And the preview message appeared. Carol, did you talk to her yet? My stomach did this strange drop. For a moment I just stared at the screen. There are certain seconds where your brain splits into two voices. One says, ignore it. The other says, look. I picked up the phone. Just to check the context, I told myself. But when I opened the thread, there were dozens of messages. Not just a few. Dozens. Scrolling upward felt like falling down a staircase. The conversations went back months. At first they looked innocent enough. My mom asking how Jake's job was going. Jake complimenting her cooking. But then the tone shifted. Jake started venting about small arguments we'd had. Nothing huge. Just everyday relationship stuff. Except he wasn't telling me. He was telling her. And my mom was responding. Giving advice. Except it didn't feel like advice. It felt like strategy. One message in particular made my chest tighten. Jake had written. She got upset again tonight. I think she's overreacting. My mom replied. Emma has always been emotional. Stay calm and don't give in to it. I remember staring at that message for a long time. Trying to understand what I was looking at. Because it didn't feel like betrayal exactly. Not yet. It felt more like being discussed. Like I was a topic. A situation. Instead of a person in the room. Then I saw something that made my hands start shaking. A voice message. From Jake. Sent to my mom. The timestamp was from the night we'd had our biggest argument. The one where he'd suddenly broken up with me. I didn't play it then. I don't even know why. Maybe part of me was afraid of what it would confirm. Maybe I was still hoping the context would somehow make everything reasonable. So instead, I locked the phone. Put it back on the table. And when Jake came back from the shower, I smiled like nothing had happened. Which, in hindsight, was the moment the whole story quietly changed. Because that voice message, the one I didn't listen to that night, that was the same message that would later freeze an entire dinner table. For the next 2 days, I pretended nothing had happened. Jake and I texted like usual. Memes. Work complaints. Did you eat yet? Type stuff. Normal. Which felt surreal, considering I now knew there was an entire second conversation about me happening somewhere else. Between him and my mom. But the strange thing is, I still hadn't listened to the voice message. The one from the night we broke up. Every time I thought about it, something inside me hesitated. Because once you hear something like that, you can't put it back. So for a while I stayed in that weird middle space. Knowing enough to feel uneasy. Not knowing enough to feel certain. Then on the third night, I couldn't avoid it anymore. I was sitting on my bed with my laptop open, pretending to study. But my brain kept circling back to the same thought. Why would Jake send my mom a voice message about our breakup? Eventually curiosity won. I opened the message thread again. My hands were actually shaking a little. Which felt ridiculous. It was just a recording. Just words. But the moment I pressed play, I dropped my phone. Literally. That's how the crack happened. The tiny spiderweb fracture on the corner of the screen. I remember staring at it on the carpet for a second before picking it up again. Because what I had just heard didn't make sense. Jake's voice came through the speaker, calm and slightly amused. Yeah. I finally ended it tonight. There was a pause. Then he laughed. Not loudly. Just a small, satisfied laugh. I told you she'd cry. Another pause. Then the part that made my stomach flip. You were right though. Once you stop giving into it, she backs down fast. I felt like I was reading someone else's life. Because the conversation didn't sound like two people worried about me. It sounded like a debrief. Like they had been watching a plan play out. And my mom's reply underneath the recording said, she needs to learn eventually. I sat there for a long time after that. Just staring at those words. Trying to figure out what hurt more. The fact that Jake had spoken about me like that. Or the fact that my mom had agreed. That was the first wave. The moment where everything cracked open. But here's the weird thing about emotional shock. Your brain still tries to fix the story. I remember thinking maybe they meant something different. Maybe it sounded worse than it was. Maybe my mom had been trying to help the relationship somehow. Which is embarrassing to admit now. But when someone has been your safe place your whole life, your brain fights really hard against seeing them differently. So I closed the messages. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't even cry. I just went to sleep. The next morning, things felt strangely quiet inside my head. Like a storm had passed. I told myself I understood the situation now. Jake was immature. My mom had crossed a boundary. It hurt. But it was over. I thought that was the full story. It wasn't. Because later that afternoon I opened the message thread again. And I scrolled further up. Past the breakup. Past the arguments. All the way to the beginning. And that's when the second wave hit. The first message between Jake and my mom wasn't from 6 months into our relationship. It wasn't even from the first year. It was from 3 weeks after Jake and I started dating. 3 weeks. The message said, "Thanks for being honest about her." My mom replied, "Someone has to keep her grounded." I remember leaning back in my chair and staring at the ceiling. Because suddenly the entire timeline of my relationship looked different. All those little jokes. All those Emma is sensitive comments. All those quiet smiles across the dinner table. They hadn't just been observations. They had been ongoing. Then something happened a few days later that changed everything again. But before I explain that part, I need to stop here for a second. Because there's something important I haven't told you yet. Something that completely reframes the dinner I mentioned at the beginning. You see, the night my mom invited Jake over to humiliate me, it wasn't a surprise. At least, not for me. I need to explain something before the dinner makes sense. Because if I leave this part out, the whole story sounds like I walked blindly into a trap. I didn't. By the time my mom invited me to that dinner, I already knew Jake would be there. I just didn't know exactly how the night would unfold. And that decision, choosing to go anyway, is something I've questioned a lot since. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. The way I found out about the dinner was almost casual. My mom called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice sounded warm, the way it always does when she's pretending everything is normal. "Emma, sweetheart, you should come by Thursday night. I'm making that lemon chicken you like." I remember hesitating, because at that point Jake and I had already been broken up for a few weeks, and my mom hadn't asked many questions about it, which, at the time, I had found strange. Usually she had opinions about everything, but that day she just said, "Jake might stop by too. He still has that cookbook he borrowed." The sentence landed in my chest like a stone. There it was, out in the open. Except the way she said it made it sound completely reasonable. Like she was just mentioning a small logistical detail. Not the fact that she was inviting my ex-boyfriend to dinner with me. I asked, carefully, "You invited Jake?" And she laughed lightly. "Oh Emma, don't be dramatic. It's just dinner." There it was again. That word. Dramatic. The same word Jake had used. The same label that had slowly followed me around for months. In that moment something inside my head went very quiet. Not angry. Not panicked. Just clear. Because suddenly I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. My mom didn't see this situation the way I did. To her, Jake wasn't the guy who had spoken about me like a project. He was the reasonable one. The calm one. And I was still the sensitive daughter who probably overreacted. I hung up the phone and sat on my couch for a long time. There were a few different choices I could have made. I could have refused to go. I could have confronted her immediately. I could have sent her the voice message and ended the entire conversation. But instead, I did something else. I opened that recording again. The one Jake had sent her. And I listened to it 3 more times. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. In the background of the recording, Jake said one more sentence. Quiet. Almost like an afterthought. "If she ever finds out we've been talking, she'll freak out." And my mom's written reply under the message said, "She won't." I stared at that reply for a long time. Because that's when the small crack on my phone screen caught the light again, the same crack from the night I dropped it. And suddenly the whole situation felt strangely balanced. They thought I didn't know. They thought I would walk into that dinner confused and emotional. They thought they understood the entire story. But they didn't know I had the recording. I wish I could say I immediately decided to play it. Like some clever plan formed right away. But honestly, it didn't happen like that. At first I just felt tired. Sad, mostly. Because realizing your own parent has been quietly siding against you in your relationship is a strange kind of grief. Not explosive. Just heavy. But over the next 2 days something changed. Not revenge. Not anger. Just a growing sense that the truth had been sitting in my pocket this entire time. And everyone else in the room thought the story was different. So I decided to go to the dinner. Not because I wanted to expose anyone. Not even because I wanted to win. I just didn't want to sit at that table pretending anymore. And this is where the grey part of the story begins. Because sometimes I still wonder if what I did next was fair. I knew they believed I was walking in blind. I knew they were comfortable. And I let them believe that. I didn't warn them. I didn't give them a chance to explain first. I just showed up. Phone in my pocket. That cracked corner of the screen pressing against my thumb. And a single voice message waiting to be played. What I didn't expect was how close I came to losing my nerve before I ever pressed the button. By the time I pulled into my mom's driveway Thursday night, my hands were shaking. Not dramatically. Just enough that I noticed it when I turned off the engine. There's something strange about walking into a situation where you know more than everyone else in the room. You feel calm. But your body still understands the stakes. I sat there for a minute staring at the house. The porch light was on. I could see shadows moving through the kitchen window. And for a brief second, I almost drove away. That's the part one don't think people talk about enough. The moment where you realize you could avoid the entire confrontation. Just leave. Pretend you got sick. Text an excuse. Protect the fragile piece that's been holding your family together. But then I thought about that message again. She won't. My mom had been so certain I would never know. So certain I would stay in my usual role. Quiet. Agreeable. Easy. And something about that certainty made me open the car door. Inside, the house smelled like lemon and garlic. My mom was standing at the stove when I walked in. She turned and smiled. "Oh good, you're here." Everything about her expression looked normal. Warm. Calm. Like the past few months of my life hadn't happened. Then I heard Jake's voice from the dining room. "Hey, Emma." My stomach dropped a little. But I kept my face neutral. "Hey." Dinner started almost politely. We talked about work. My mom asked about my classes. Jake told a story about a coworker who messed up a presentation. For about 15 minutes, everything felt strangely peaceful. That's the false calm part. The moment where you start wondering if maybe you misunderstood the whole situation. Maybe this dinner really was just dinner. Maybe my mom thought she was helping us reconnect somehow. I even caught myself relaxing a little. And that's when the shift happened. Jake made a comment about relationships being complicated. Then he looked at me and said, lightly, "Sometimes people just react too strongly to things, you know?" My mom chuckled softly. That same familiar laugh. Then she added, "Emma's always had a tendency to escalate situations." The words were gentle, almost affectionate. But suddenly I was 10 years old again. Standing in the kitchen while my feelings were being explained to someone else. I felt my thumb brush against the cracked corner of my phone inside my pocket. And that's when Jake said something that almost made me abandon the whole plan. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. Not smug. Not triumphant. Just uneasy. He said, "I never wanted things to get messy." For a split second, doubt rushed in. Maybe he regretted it. Maybe they didn't realize how much those messages would hurt me. Maybe playing the recording would only make everything worse. That was the near-miss moment. The point where the entire night could have ended differently. Because I almost stood up and said, "Never mind. Let's just move on." And here's the part one still wrestle with. Maybe that would have been the kinder choice. But before I could say anything, my mom spoke again. She just has a habit of making things bigger than they are. Something inside my chest went very still. Not angry. Just finished. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. For a second, Jake frowned slightly. "What are you doing?" My voice sounded calmer than I expected. "I just want to play something." My mom tilted her head. "Emma, this really isn't necessary." But I had already opened the recording. My thumb hovered over the screen. And right then, I hesitated again. Because suddenly the whole moment felt heavier than I'd imagined. Once the message played, there would be no going back. I even heard myself say quietly, "Maybe this is too much." Jake looked confused. My mom looked annoyed. And for a split second, I wondered if I was about to prove their entire point. That I was dramatic. Emotional. Escalating things. But then I remembered the sentence that had been sitting under that recording for weeks. "She won't." So I pressed play. Jake's voice filled the room. "Yeah. I finally ended it tonight." The fork slipped out of my mom's hand. Clink. And suddenly the entire table went silent. For a few seconds after the recording started, nobody reacted. Not even Jake. His voice kept playing from my phone, calm and casual in a way that felt surreal in that quiet room. "Yeah. I finally ended it tonight." Then the small laugh. The one I'd heard a dozen times while listening to the message alone in my apartment. Except now it sounded completely different. Because the person laughing was sitting right across from me. Jake's face slowly drained of color. My mom didn't move. Her hand was still hovering near the glass she'd dropped her fork beside. And the room suddenly felt smaller. The next part of the message played. "I told you she'd cry." I heard Jake inhale sharply. Like his body had just realized what was happening. And that's when he said it. "Emma, wait." But the recording kept going. You were right though. Once you stop giving into it, she backs down fast. I reached forward and stopped the audio before the last line played. The room was completely silent. I think that's the moment I'd imagined over and over in my head. The reveal. The shock. But when it actually happened, it didn't feel victorious. It felt heavy. Like I had just dropped something fragile onto the table and everyone was staring at the pieces. Jake looked at me first. Then at my mom, then back at me. Where did you get that? I almost laughed. Your phone, I said quietly. My mom finally spoke. Her voice was different now. Not calm. Not controlled. Just uncertain. Emma, sweetheart. That word hit my ears in a strange way. Sweetheart. After weeks of messages about how emotional I was. After months of conversations where I had apparently been a topic instead of a person. And for the first time that night, I felt something close to anger. Not explosive. Just sharp. You said I wouldn't find out, I told her. Her eyes flicked to Jake for a second. That tiny movement told me everything. She already knew the message existed. She just thought I'd never see it. Jake pushed his chair back slightly. Emma, I didn't think. No, I said softly. You didn't. For a moment nobody spoke. Then something happened I hadn't expected. Jake ran a hand through his hair and looked down at the table. And when he spoke again, his voice sounded tired. Not defensive. Not angry. Just tired. I shouldn't have sent that. It wasn't an apology exactly. But it also wasn't the confident version of Jake I had been bracing myself for. My mom finally looked directly at me. And for the first time that entire night, she didn't look like the person who had everything under control. She looked older somehow. I was trying to help, she said. I blinked. Help who? The question hung there. Because suddenly it wasn't clear. Help Jake manage my emotions. Help me become less dramatic. Help maintain some version of peace she thought was healthier. I don't know if she had an answer. She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it again. And in that moment something strange happened inside me. The anger I expected to feel never fully arrived. Instead, there was just this quiet realization. For months I had imagined this confrontation ending with someone admitting I was right. Admitting they had wronged me. But real life doesn't work like courtroom scenes. People rarely say the exact sentence that fixes everything. My mom eventually looked down at the table. And for a brief second, just one, her eyes filled with tears. She wiped them away almost immediately. But I saw it. That moment is something I still think about sometimes. Because it was the only moment all night where she looked like someone who realized she might have crossed a line. Not a villain. Not a mastermind. Just a person who had convinced herself she was doing the right thing. Dinner ended quietly after that. Jake left first. My mom and I cleaned the kitchen in silence. And the strangest part of the whole night? We never actually finished the conversation. Even now, there are things between us that still haven't been said. Which is probably the most honest ending a family story can have. The house felt different after Jake left. Quieter than usual. Not the peaceful kind of quiet either. The kind where every sound seems slightly louder than it should be. The faucet running while we rinsed dishes. The scrape of plates against the sink. The refrigerator humming in the background. My mom and I moved around the kitchen like two people who had forgotten the normal rhythm of being around each other. For years we had done this exact routine after dinners. One of us washed. One of us dried. That night we just hovered. I picked up a plate, wiped it slowly with a towel, and set it on the counter. My phone sat on the kitchen island a few feet away. Screen dark. The cracked corner catching the overhead light. For a long time neither of us mentioned the recording again. Eventually my mom cleared her throat. You shouldn't have gone through his phone. The sentence landed softly, but it carried the weight of something familiar. The same instinct to redirect the problem. To focus on the rule that had been broken instead of the reason behind it. A few months earlier, that sentence might have made me immediately apologize. But something about the night had shifted my perspective. I didn't feel defensive. I just felt calm. I wasn't trying to find it, I said. She didn't reply right away. She rinsed another dish slowly. Then she said something quieter. I didn't think it would hurt you that much. That sentence sat in the room for a moment. And it was strange, because I believed her. Not the part about it not hurting me, but the part about her not understanding how deeply it would. For my mom, conversations like that were probably practical. Problem-solving. Trying to manage situations. But for me, it had felt like something else entirely. Like being quietly outnumbered in my own life. I didn't say all of that out loud. Instead, I asked the only question that had been circling my head since I read those messages. Why didn't you just talk to me? She dried her hands on a towel. Then she leaned against the counter and looked at me in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not authoritative. Not certain. Just thoughtful. You get overwhelmed sometimes, she said. I thought if Jake handled things calmly, it might help. There it was. The logic. Not malicious. Not strategic. Just misguided. And maybe that's the hardest kind of betrayal to process. The kind where nobody believes they're doing anything wrong. We didn't solve everything that night. In fact, we barely solved anything. My mom and I still talk. We still have dinners sometimes. But the dynamic between us is different now. Not broken. Just more honest. I say things I would have swallowed before. And sometimes she listens. Sometimes she doesn't. Families aren't tidy stories. They're long conversations that never fully end. Jake texted me once about a week after the dinner. Just one message. I'm sorry you had to hear it like that. I never responded. Not out of anger. Just because there wasn't anything left to say. The strange thing is, the moment I remember most clearly from that night isn't the recording. It's the sound of that fork hitting the table. Clink. Because that tiny noise was the moment everything stopped pretending. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that silence can hide a lot of things for a long time. But eventually the truth makes a sound. Sometimes a loud one. Sometimes just a small piece of metal touching a plate. Before I go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where you realized the version of you people believed wasn't actually who you were anymore? Because I think a lot of us grow up inside stories that other people wrote about us. And the hardest part of becoming an adult is deciding when to rewrite them. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Emma's voice travels. Sometimes the quietest truth changes everything.